are as diverse as the people who own them, but they have one thing in common. They bring to the garden a sense of peace, tranquility, and a reconnection with nature that we are all searching for. Hi, I'm Jan Goldfield, landscape designer and owner of Custom Water Gardens in New Orleans, Louisiana. Today we are going to start a series of programs explaining how to build a pond, the most dramatic part of the garden, and explain how to incorporate the beauty of the pond into the excitement of your garden. Because pictures provide such a powerful way to learn, we are taking you on site as we actually create a custom water garden for one of our clients. As we build this pond, we will help you to clearly understand the elements of building a pond in order to create one that is special just for you. We will show you how to choose the proper location for your pond, how to make the design right for you, and then a step-by-step building process. And finally, we will choose plant material so that you can put in an exciting pond in your backyard in a very short time. When we design a pond, we always want to take into consideration the lifestyles of the owner and the size of the garden and the place that we have to put the pond. We always want to put the pond as close to the viewing area as we can. If the client wants to hear the pond from the bedroom, then we want to place it fairly close to the bedroom. If most of the living is done outside, as it is here down in New Orleans, we want to place the pond near the patio or where the clients live when they're outside. If they have a den or a playroom that they view the pond from, we want to put the pond over there. We're always going to put it fairly close to the house so that the clients can enjoy it from almost anywhere. When we have a large garden, we want to put the pond where it can be viewed by almost any place in the entire garden. Generally speaking, when we have a large garden, the pond is only one room of that garden, so that we have to tie in the pond with other spaces in the garden using generally some sort of a hardscape material like fences or gazebos or arbors or trellises or even paths that we're going to do in this particular garden. We're in the garden of Larry and Olga Blackwell, who had some unique goals in their garden design, and I'd like them to share them with you.
One of the things I wanted with the pond is I love the sound of running water. It's very soothing. And I also wanted to be able to look out my back door and just lay on my couch and just see outside into the aesthetically pleasing colors and the sound of the music of the water. And also, with the grace of God, I would like to, when I have my gazebo, just to look out and just really enjoy the small piece of nature I have.
My name is Larry Blackwell, and we wanted a pond just so we could sit down and relax and enjoy some of nature's beautiful colors that come about. And as you can see, we have the colors that we always wanted. The pond is peaceful, it's restful. We can sit down and relax and maybe even have a glass of wine. I love the outdoors, I love the way this pond looks, and eventually, as my wife said, we're going to have a gazebo so we can be out on the other side and enjoy the colors from a different direction.
Okay, now we're going to move on to step-by-step instructions. Many years ago, I wanted a pond in my garden and decided I'd build one. I started experimenting. After months of research, I found not much was written in a way that I could understand, and what I could find said that ponds required machinery and knowledge of construction methods that I certainly didn't know. Convinced there had to be a better way, I developed ways to build a pond and waterfalls that do not require machines or years of training. You will be able to get everything you need at an aquatic or pond store and a good hardware store. So here are some of the materials that you'll need. You'll need shovels, a pick if you have really hard soil, loppers and hand clippers, rake, wheelbarrow, 14-inch galvanized roofing flashing in a roll, 1/2-inch PVC pipe cut into 2-foot sections, 1 roll of 15-pound roofing felt, and a 45 mm liner cut to specifications. You'll need rocks, probably 1 ton as a minimum, possibly more than that depending on the size of your pond. As we discussed, here's the PVC pipe cut into approximately 2-foot sections that we're going to use all the way around the flashing. This is the 14-inch galvanized roofing flashing that you should be able to get at any building supply store or hardware store. And this is the 15-pound roofing felt that we'll be using as a cushion underneath the liner. Okay, after you've chosen the location of your pond and you've decided on a design, I often, when I'm doing a design, will choose the simplest shape that I can. Usually it's a kidney shape or an oval shape, avoiding very sharp corners or turns because they will give you a lot of trouble later on when you're placing rocks, and you'll lose all of that definition that you thought you were going to get. So I find that if you use a simple shape, that way you can get the drama in your pond using your waterfall and using plant materials. So how do we get that simple shape? Well, I use a real high-tech method by using a garden hose. We get the garden hose that belongs to the client. We put it in a big circle after we've determined how big the pond is going to be. And then we all move the garden hose until it's exactly the shape we like. And at that point, we start digging. We dig down almost straight, almost perpendicular, 14 inches. Remember that 14-inch galvanized flashing? We're going to dig just as deep as that 14 inches. The reason we're going to do that is because eventually we want our pond to be 18 inches deep, and 4 of those inches are going to be above ground. When we start digging, one of the things we have to watch out for is the edge of the pond. It's very important because the rocks and the weight of the rocks are going to be out here on the outside of the pond, that we not break this edge while we're digging the hole. So if you'll notice, they're going almost straight down, but they're being very, very careful to stay within the hose and not break the edge of the wall. As they dig, you'll also see that the dirt is being put at least 2 feet away from the edge of the pond, because remember, we are going to use it later. Now that we have the hole dug, we've got the bottom relatively smooth. We've removed all shells, tree roots. We've flattened them out. We've loppered them off so that we've got a smooth surface on the bottom. The next thing we're going to do is reinforce the walls of the pond with the 14-inch galvanized roofing flashing. So we put the flashing all the way around in our 14-inch hole. That's another way we know how deep the hole should be, is that the flashing fits nicely. We continue the flashing all the way around. We push it up against the side of our almost straight up and down wall, and we start putting in our 2-foot pieces of PVC, which will continue all the way around the pond and hold the sides of the pond in place in case of heavy rains or storms or floods. The walls of the pond will not cave in. I usually find it easier to use a hammer on the flat side. Otherwise, I might hit my hand. You pound the PVC in, and we'll space the PVC at about 18-inch to 2-foot intervals all the way around the edge of the pond. Now that we have the flashing all the way around, we have the PVC pipe pounded in. We're going to use our rubber mallet, and we're going to bend the top of the flashing back toward the outside of the pond so that the sharp edge will not penetrate the liner. Gina, my project manager, prefers to use pliers when she's bending back the flashing. Now that we have the top of the flashing crimped so that it won't penetrate the liner, we're going to cover the entire surface with 15-pound roofing felt. You want to hand me another piece? We're just going to go around the pond, letting it overlap about 6 inches around out here where the rocks are going to lay, until we get the entire surface of the pond covered with roofing felt. Now that the bottom of the pond is covered with felt, you're going to put the liner in the pond. As you can see, it's a heavy liner, so you need more than one person, usually more than 2 people, to handle it so that it gets in the pond properly where it needs to be so that you can fill it up with water without having to move the liner again. A simple formula for figuring out the size of your liner is the width of the pond plus 7 feet and the length of the pond plus 7 feet. We have the liner unfolded. We're ready to put the water in the pond. Okay, everybody, go to lunch. We're starting the third day of our pond building. The liner is in the pond and it's filled up with water. When we put the flashing in, because we can never get it perfect against the back wall, we have to come back and fill it. Another one, Gina. We can't do this before we fill it up with water, because if we tried to do that, the flashing would then collapse inward. After finishing the backfill, we're going to start the first course of rocks. We're going to use the squarest and thickest rocks that we have in our palette. Would you hand me one? Probably take 2 of you. The rocks we're using to build the pond, here in Louisiana we call them Arkansas moss rocks, although they're quarried throughout the Midwestern United States, probably from the East Coast all the way to maybe Oklahoma, probably even into Colorado. I always stress that we use a flat veneer rock like this. The thinner the better, because we want coverage. We're using a thicker rock on the bottom because the thicker rocks generally aren't as pretty as the thinner ones. And in a massive pond like this one, I'm going to move it like this, over and up. There we go. A massive pond like this one handles thick rocks very well. So we have many rocks that are at least probably 4 inches thick. As we move toward the top course of rocks, you'll see that our rocks get thinner, and we try to look for rocks that are pretty on the top. Great, Gina, thank you. We got rained out yesterday, so we didn't quite finish the whole bottom row of coping. But we have done all the coping as far as the waterfall. So what we're going to do now is start putting the top row of coping on. Now this is probably one of the most important parts of building a pond. This is what allows the pond and the water to be above grade so that many things will happen. One is no runoff will get into the water, so any pesticides or insecticides or runoff from the roads or golf course or roofs of houses, any kind of inorganic material will not get in the pond and foul it and therefore cause the plants and the fish to die. The other thing it does is it keeps the water down in the pond where it belongs. Here in Louisiana, we have a water table that's not very deep. And when we have floods and rain, the water table comes up and it pushes the water right out of the pond, and the fish swim off and the plants drift off to the neighbor's yard. And then when the water table goes down, there's very little water left in the pond, and we have to start all over again. If we add 4 inches of water weight to the pond, we then keep the water in place where it needs to be, and we don't have the water displaced when the water table comes up. The third thing it does, which is really serendipitous, is it looks really pretty. So let's get started doing the next course of rocks to build the pond up our 4 inches. As you can see, putting the courses of rocks around the pond is kind of like putting a giant jigsaw puzzle together. But you can see that the pond is already beginning to take shape. Now we're going to start the top course of rocks. That's why we left this liner hanging over like this. We're going to put the liner over the top, and we're going to put another course of rocks on top of it. Before we do that, we have a little bit of excess liner, and we're just going to cut that off with a kitchen knife. Okay, now that we've finished the top course all the way around the pond, we've got a little bit different perspective of how the pond's going to look. We've got the place marked where we know we're going to put our waterfall. Now we're going to start doing our waterfall, finding the biggest rocks that we have in the rock palette. We have the base of our waterfall finished now. We use the biggest rocks in our rock palette, some of them up to 4 inches thick, and we put them as a foundation for the rest of the waterfall. Okay, one of the things that I like to do when I'm building a waterfall is I use the biggest pump that I can possibly afford. This is a 4,100 gallon an hour pump. We attach to it a 1 1/4 inch hose, and for even more drama, these are submersible pumps, by the way. For even more drama, we use a teeth at the end of our 1 1/4 inch hose, and we put the T on it like this so that we have 2 places where the water comes out of the pump.
There you go.
Now let's talk about the plants that we need to put in the pond in order to keep the pond crystal clear and relatively maintenance-free. The first thing we must have is submerged vegetation. What I like to use is Anacharis, A-N-A-C-H-A-R-I-S. We need 1 bunch of Anacharis for every square foot of surface area. So if your pond is 6 feet by 10 feet, you will need 60 bunches of Anacharis in order to keep the pond clear. The Anacharis serves several functions. It acts as a filter, so it traps any kind of particulate matter. The other thing it does is it is fish food. So at no time will you feed the fish that you will eventually put in your pond. They eat the Anacharis, and in turn they fertilize it. So the pond is perfectly balanced and needs little or no maintenance throughout the entire life of the pond. So the absolute positive must plant is Anacharis or other submerged vegetation, but you will find Anacharis works the best. The next kind of plant that we talk about putting in the pond are floaters. We have lots of floaters that we can use in the pond. Down here in the south, we have water hyacinths. Usually they're free because they're so invasive. We use them. They also make a great filter because they have long, long roots, and they trap particulate matter. They also suck up any kinds of toxins that might be in the water or might get in your pond somehow. They're so invasive that we have to be very careful with them. If you notice they're starting to take over, be sure and take them out. Put them in the compost heap. Do not put them in any sort of public waterway, because pretty soon that waterway will be clogged with hyacinths. One of the floaters that we use is called parrot's feather. It's a light green, airy plant. It's very invasive. It stays up above the water. It can even creep up over the rocks sometime. Looks absolutely wonderful. It doesn't flower, but the plant itself is so nice that we use it to keep the pond in the shade and give the fish a place to hide. Other floaters are water poppies, water clover, and of course the wonderful, wonderful water lily. After floaters, we have marginal plants. These are emergent plants. They usually stick upright. They can be almost anything. Any kind of a rush, any kind of an iris. Of course, here in Louisiana, we have the Louisiana iris that bloom for us all the time and just make a wonderful, wonderful display. We also have plants that sometimes we don't think about using in the water. We love to use calla lilies, which very few people think of as a water plant, but indeed it is. I often try plants in the water that I'm not sure will work, and a lot of times they do. I'll use taro, which is a tropical plant. Here in New Orleans, they're often called elephant ears. They have a huge tropical leaf on them. They also kind of like the shade, so it gives us an alternative if we happen to have a shade garden. There are other irises and other emergents. There's a variegated acorus that is absolutely fabulous. It's a short plant, has a short habit. Many of the reeds, many of the irises and rushes are rather short, and they're great for ornamentals around the edges of the pond, or even in the middle of the pond, propped up on maybe a few bricks or a few rocks. And we've discussed the necessary things for the pond, which are the submerged vegetation, the floating vegetation, and the emergent vegetation. Other plants that you use in your plant palette in your garden and around your pond are going to depend on where you live and the availability, the time of year, and how much work and money you want to spend. A signature plant with me is a Chinese fan palm. I love to use them behind a waterfall. They add such drama to the waterfall. They soften it up and make it look as if the water is coming out naturally instead of coming out from just a rock pile. One of the pluses of living in New Orleans is we get to use the wonderful tropical gingers. This is a shell ginger that was existing in the garden. It will grow to as high as 14 feet if it's allowed. We do tend to whack it down every couple of years so it doesn't get out of hand. For us here, it made a beautiful focal point and an anchor for the entire pond that we could design around. Another one of the gingers is a variegated ginger, which serves as a perfect complement to the other ones. It'll bush up quite a bit. It'll probably get to be about 4 feet high, and in conjunction with the shell ginger and the Chinese fan palm, it'll make a beautiful backdrop for our waterfall. We hope this program has made you as excited and enthusiastic about having a pond in your garden as we are. If you need further help, go to www.pondlady.com. Until next time, good gardening. This is Jan Goldfield.